Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome to the course, Environmental Impact Assessment. Today we see that EIA is almost in all the countries across the world in various forms. In the previous lectures, we also saw that EIA is a process and a legal tool. However, you may note, you may see how an EIA system is. For example, it is compulsory or flexible in a country, what level of engagement people will have, what type of action EIA would require, and how effectively it will be implemented on ground will differ from country to country. So USA had a key role to play in formally setting up the EIA process, and the process eventually spread across to many more countries. In USA, it was established in 1969 and in India in 1994. And reviewing the journey of EIA as a legal tool helps us to understand its potential, limitation, and challenges. So today, we will see evolution of EIA in the context of USA. Therefore, in this session, we will look into how EIA evolved and how was the experience of EIA in USA, what is the current status of EIA worldwide, what factors influence the form or the format of EIA system, what role key international organizations have played in EIA procedures and adaptation. Accordingly, the learning outcomes will include that you should be able to review the evolution of EIA and experience in the USA and understand its scope, limitation, and challenges. You should be able to describe the current status of EIA worldwide and reflect upon why it is different, identify and evaluate the factors influencing state of EIA, its format in different contexts, explain the key role of international organization. For this section, our key reference is Chapter 2 from the book Introduction to EIA by Glasson and Thurville. So you may recollect that from our very first lecture, we talked about Rachel Carson, who strongly brought up environmental risk through her writing on Silent Spring in 1962. She highlighted the environmental risk of commonly used insecticides. So in addition, there was a writing of Paul Ehrlich, The Population Bomb in 1968. He warned of the dangers of overpopulation, mass starvation, societal problems, environmental deterioration, like we reviewed in the first week of our lectures. At that time, the book was criticized for projecting darker picture. And think of it like where we are right now, what kind of problems we are facing. And I have given you the link of this particular talk. You can, if you're interested, you can see further. Then there was fire incident on the Cayuga River in Ohio. River in Ohio became so polluted that it caught fire. The fire shooted avalanche. Following this, water pollution control activities such as the Clean Water Act and the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement was aligned with the entire process. So these led to increasing concerns in USA. The result of that was the formation of the US National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, of 1969. NEPA was the first major environmental law in the USA and is often referred to as Magna Carta, as a key document of the US federal environmental laws. So NEPA was the first legislation that required EIA. So it was in this document, legislative document, you find EIA. EIA in USA became reference point for learning for other countries based on its experiences and development of the process. So everyone was watching at them. You may also note that any legislation also has the challenge of failing into range of lawsuits, litigation based on its functions and interpretation. Because of these cases of series of litigation following NEPA, so there were a lot of court cases, many other countries were careful about creating law and implementing it related with environment. So following several proposals, like when all these was happening, there were several proposals were made, formation of Council on Environmental Quality happened, was established as a high-level committee. And the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, was a form of unified environmental policy. This came into existence in February 1969 through series of bills. You can see the series of bills here. There were a series of discussion also to declare national environmental policy, which is NEPA. They proposed a statement that, pay attention to the statement, that each person has a fundamental and inalienable right to a healthful environment, which would put that environmental health as the fundamental right. It was later. So first they claimed it to be the fundamental. Then later it was slightly diluted by saying that each person should enjoy a healthful environment. In the initial form of the proposal, it was also, we see that it required that the proponent provide the findings. The word findings was used, which would be further reviewed for environmental protection body, reviewed by the environmental protection body. By proponent, here we mean one who is proposing the development activity. So we refer them as proponent. The literature suggests that the Senate had intended to weaken the bill which was being processed, by requiring only a detailed statement. So instead, the detailed assessment was required, or rather it became much stronger, and this statement was required to be evaluated by the external reviewer. So earlier it was by the internal agency, but then it became external reviewer, and could also be challenged, meaning can be taken to court as well. So it would be reviewed by the external review, as well as it can be challenged. And it also required that the detailed statement be made available to the public. So the entire information should be shared with the public. With all these discussions, dilutions and strengthening, NEPA became operational on 1st January 1970. So looking at the key points of NEPA, so what we were really coming up here with. So NEPA requires federal agencies to assess the environmental effects of their proposed actions prior to making decisions. The range of actions are covered by NEPA. Key to our concerns, there are a range of actions, but key to our concern is making decisions or permit applications, that means allowing them, giving permit, and adopting federal land management actions, so how the land should be managed. So the link is provided to you in this, you can see here, to the official website here, so you can see all those provisions here. The purpose of this act was to declare a national policy which will encourage productive and enjoyable harmony between man and his environment, so that balance was looked up to, and to promote efforts which will prevent or eliminate damage to the environment and biosphere and stimulate the health and welfare of man, and to enrich the understanding of ecological system and natural resource important to the nation, and to establish Council of Environmental Quality. So you see that what was the target and what they were trying to promote, and then how it was also leading to like better understanding as well as creation of a body which would take care of this. So, looking at the federal vision behind it and the commitment behind this was one was long term, that is, to fulfill the responsibility of each generation as trustees of the environment for succeeding generation. So, the idea, the vision was of long term, plus it was of assuring quality of life, assure for all Americans safe, healthful, productive, and aesthetically and culturally pleasing surroundings. Then the vision was about sustainable use of resources. Likewise, you see there was importance given to the preserve important historic, cultural, and natural aspect of the national heritage, as well as you see that there was target to achieve a balance between population and resources, as well as enhance the quality of renewable resources and approach maximum attainable recycle of depletable resources. And you will also see that it talked about, in part C, it talked about right. At the same time, it also talked about responsibility. And the right was also the Congress here recognized that each person, so it was not just on the government, but the right was also for each individual, the citizen. Person should enjoy a healthful environment. At the same time, not only having right, but they also had a responsibility, that each person has a responsibility to contribute to the preservation and enhancement of the environment. So, looking at what NEPA requires, so what you really need to do. So, Title 1 of NEPA, there are two titles in this. So, Title 1 of NEPA contains a declaration of national environmental policy. This policy requires the federal government, you may see here, the federal government, to use all practicable means. So, all the practicable which one can implement to create and maintain conditions under which man and nature can exist in productive harmony. So, you may note that it makes the federal government, the central government, responsible to create and maintain conditions under which man and nature can exist in productive harmony. And then also it takes care of the requirement of the future generation of Americans. And it also made them responsible to adapt all practical means. And by this, it was important that everything was consistent with the other essential consideration of national policy. And it should be consistent so that the negative environmental impact could be reduced, and not only to reduce negative impact, but also preserve and enhance the environment through federal plans and programs. So they had to make policy consistent for reduction of the negative impact, as well as they were supposed to take other steps to preserve and enhance the environment through plans and programs. So NEPA has two parts set as titles. So Title 1 sets up national policy on protection and restoration of environmental quality. Title 2 sets up 3-member council of environmental quality. So there's set of laws, and then the other is the body which will take care of it. So the Council of Environmental Quality, CEQ, would review environmental programs and progress, and would advise presidents on these matters. And then the president would be required to submit an annual environmental quality report to the Congress. So we see that in section 1.2, requirements are of procedural nature. So it talks about the process that has to be followed, and you will see that federal agencies are required to undertake a very systematic interdisciplinary approach, identify and develop methods and procedure. So you can see here. And what all detailed statements should contain. So what all should be there, like you can see here in the image, the detailed statement should provide environmental impact of the proposed action. It should identify adverse impact, environmental effects. It should provide alternatives as well to the proposed action. And it should indicate the relationship between short-term uses and the long-term productivity, plus decision on implementation of any irreversible and irretrievable commitments. So what decision has been made, and which are of what nature and in the proposal. So Section 103 requires federal agencies to review their regulations and procedures to identify any deficiencies or inconsistencies. Like we said, they were responsible to identify this, so they would be taking care of it, and this section gives those instructions here. So the NEPA is generally worded law, so it's all in words, and it depends considerably on the the interpretation. So in order to assess, the CEQ prepared guidelines for assisting interpretations. So CEQ would come up with all the guidelines and standards. So a lot of strengthening of the act happened following court decisions. So we see that because it was open for interpretation, as soon as it was implemented, a lot of legal litigation came into picture, and court ruling came, and that somehow allowed to strengthen the EIA process. So the kind of court cases came were, like by one of the study, it showed that some challenged proponents, so the proponents of the development projects or agencies' decisions to not prepare EIA. So like how were they really deciding when to prepare EIA and when not to prepare EIA, which meant interpretation of whether the project was major or by government or related project activities that had insignificant to significant environmental impact. So how they were coming to that judgment, so that kind of court cases came in. And some of the objectives were related with quality of EIA. So they were also questioning the quality of EIA, and which raised concerns about the completeness of the assessments. If it covered all range, like was it adequate enough? Did it address to all the concerns of environment or not? So that kind of court cases also came up. And whether the alternatives were considered or not by the proponents. So even challenging the adequacy of the report was also, of the assessment was also challenged. So like you can see here in the court case of 1971 of, this is the case of Culvert Cliffs Coordinating Committee, brought this action against the Atomic Energy Commission. So it was the project of Atomic Energy Commission, and this Culvert Cliffs charging Atomic Energy Commission that its recently adopted procedural rules, what they were adopting, failed to satisfy the demands of NEPA. So it was not as per the law that this commission gave consideration to environmental factors. So it was challenging their process. The court decided that the Atomic Energy Commission's procedure rules did not comply with congressional policy spoken in NEPA. So it was not really aligning, and it was inadequate. So court did come to that ruling. There were also cases which charged that agency's decision, one of the early court decision provided the guidance for review of the decision. So what the EIA reports, EIA assessment, the decision was made in favor or against, but there were cases which were challenging the decisions. So here the court noted that the court's function is to ensure agency has taken hard look. So it has really looked well into the thing. Whereas court is not really going to supplement their decision, but only going to check whether they have considered it substantially or not. So many initial litigations, so these are kind of litigations, court cases that US after implementation of NEPA they were facing. So many initial litigation and court decisions helps to improve the entire system. So there were also delays in execution of project, making project unfeasible. So you think of the time period it would take for a court case to resolve and the project to really see the light. So there were also declaration of protected areas. So some projects didn't really work, and then the areas were protected, such as national park and wildlife areas. As suggested, due to many court cases in the beginning of EIA system, many countries had their learning about the processes, challenges, and possibilities. So they were learning from the case of US. So later, many guidelines were set up to ease the interpretation. So within the US system, various other guidelines were set up to ease the interpretation, help others to interpret well, and then to implement well. Further efforts were made to reduce paperwork also and reduce delay and target significant environmental issues only and look at the alternatives as well. So USA policy has led to formation of EIA process and legal system and also reduced the cost involved. So by improving the system, they could do this. Number of EIA reports have considerably improved. The design of projects have also improved. So the target of overall having a sustainable development was like really their projects were much more environmentally aligned. So many, we also see that many state level EIA systems have been established in USA in addition to NEPA. So every state, most of the states have their own EIA system. And as they require EIA for state actions that require state funding or permissions and other projects in particular sensitive areas. So every state can have their own sensitive areas. So some cities such as New York and San Francisco also have their own EIA system. So that also, it's interesting to see that cities also have. And it's particularly like it is considered one of the exemplary is the California Environmental Quality Act. Which provides it have exemplary, it's considered exemplary for its scope, procedure, requirements that ensure state and local agencies engagement. So they work together for adapting feasible mitigation measures. So they come together and then see how the environmental impact can be mitigated and alternatives can also be reviewed. So they have also added greenhouse gas emissions to the list of environmental impact for analysis under this California Environmental Quality Act. So the strength of this system and evolution in USA includes early inclusion of EIA in the project planning. So we see that they really engage in the EIA process in the stage, and it's said to be more comprehensive planning. And there have been cases of changes in locations of the project, and there have been also cancellation of projects. So there has been avoidance of EIA process, weak consideration of, if we look at the negative point, there have been weak consideration of socio-economic and environmental justice. Then also cumulative impact has been not very well implemented. Monitoring and auditing and relationship between EIAs and environmental management systems still stand, some of the literature still stand weak. So there have been also recently, in the recent past, there has been radical change with the change in the government with reduction in the environmental protection measures, clean energy programs, and then pulling out of Paris Climate Change Agreement and loosening of regulations on toxic air pollutions and wildlife protection and so on. So there had been changes in recent past. So many acts, guidelines, and activities followed. Like after NEPA, we would see that many of activities follow. It's a long list you would see, like Earth Day celebration, Clean Air Act, lead-based paint restrictions, defining of air pollution danger level, and regulations on vehicles, protection of lakes, and many more changes came as per the requirements in technology development. You may follow the timeline. The link is also provided for your reference here. So now EIA has been implemented in many countries. So since NEPA. Now there are nearly 180 countries which have EIA systems. So that's a large number we are looking, and we can see that how it is being adopted in various contexts. So looking at the current status of EIA worldwide, in the image table you can see the EIA systems worldwide here. So now looking at the factors that influence the structure of EIA. So, literature identify contextual factors, something which is specific to the place we are talking about, such as political systems. So, how the EIA is, we cannot really generalize how EIA is, will depend a lot on the political system, environmental status of that particular place, international convention, what they have signed to, civil rights, culture of public participation. So even if in the EIA, how much the public participation would also depend upon how much public is aware, how engaged it is, and how much even the government opens up. So all these influence the EIA system in each country. So we also see actors and the capacity at different levels also influence the form of EIA in a country, such as rule-making body, the parliament, the sector authority, different sector, energy, infrastructure. So we see that sector authority also, how do they, what rules they lay out would also influence the EIA. Then the donors, some of the international funding agency have set up EIA guidelines, including the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development, UK Overseas Development Administration, DFID, UNEP, and World Bank. So they have all set the guidelines for EIA, so which makes people applying for funding to really adopt the format. Business that can influence also has a role to play, experience in EIA and human resource which is already there in the context, and the civil society, community-based organization, their activities also play a role. So looking at the now looking at the key role of international organizations. So in Europe, the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe have been doing considerable work. Some of the notable one is in 1991 Convention on EIA in Transboundary Context, ESPO Convention. It is primarily to assess the negative environmental impact across borders. So till now we have been talking about in the country context, but this convention talked about infrastructure which would affect different countries. You will also find Equator Principles, a private sector initiative which provide EIA guidelines for financial institutions in relation to funding decisions on major projects over financial thresholds of $10 million. By 2017, there were 92 signatories to Equator Principles in 37 countries. So international banks such as EBRD, the Asian Development Bank, African Development Bank have introduced environmental and social procedures. So you see that they have an influencing role here. Important one which we will come across often in the course is the performance standards on environmental and social sustainability introduced by the World Bank Group through the International Finance Corporation IFC, and on which the Equator Principles are based and the World Bank's environmental and social standards are based. So World Bank emphasized to like moving EIA upstream, meaning like taking it at the very initial level of the project designing, like having more effective public consultation, and then integrating EIA into the project programming, and then learning from the implementation, learning from other cases, having a feedback loop, engaging with the private sectors and especially the financiers and project sponsors, and then looking at how the EIA's quality is. So there's a lot of emphasis, and we reviewed the development of EIA in USA and across the world. EIA has become an important tool. There is variation on how EIA system exists in a context. There is a lot of support and push from the international agency. So looking at the timeline of evolution across globe taken from UN training manual, we see here that in the it's a little bit of recap here. So early mids in 1970, you see that EIA was introduced, and then it established basic principles. There were standards coming in, and then you see that developed countries are working on it. And then later in 1970 and early 1980s, you see that more of the formalized guidelines were developed, and then Other industries in developing countries introduced formal EIA in this particular period. And then you see that there was also a coming up of strategic environmental assessment, SEA, which we'll learn about. And then greater emphasis was on ecological modeling, prediction, and evaluation methods. So we see that in this particular segment, methods were evolving. And then there was also emphasis and provision for public involvement and engagement, and also coordination of environmental assessment with land use planning process also was emphasized here. Then we see in 1980 and end of that decade, we see that there were EC directives. EIA established basic principles and procedural aspects. Then there were increasing efforts to address cumulative effects. So here you see the cumulative effects, which we have spoken about in previous classes as well. And then the World Bank, it's important here, World Bank and other leading international and agencies, aid agencies, they established EIA as a requirement. So that made a major shift that most of the countries started adopting it. And this period, it was spread in Asia. So here we see that at the same time, our system also formalized. And 1990 onwards, we see that here there's more development in the transboundary effects. We are looking at the ESPO Convention here, increased use of GIS and other techniques we see here. And then the sustainability principles came here. India also adopted the EIA formally in this period, and formation of EIA legislation happened in many developing countries, and rapid growth of EIA training also took place. So part of which you are also like going through this training here. So summarizing today's session, so we reviewed the evolution of EIA and experience in USA and understood its scopes, limitation, and challenges. We described the current status of EIA worldwide. We'll try to identify and evaluate factors influencing state and formats of EIA in different contexts, and explain the key role of international organization. So our coverage has been limited as per the scope of the subject. Additional resources to read and watch are provided to you. These were the references for this particular class. Please feel free to ask questions. Let us know about any concerns you have. Do share your opinions, experiences, and suggestions. Looking forward to interacting and co-learning with you in our discourse of EIA. Thank you.